Hi, welcome to Cooking with Chef Goldberg. Today, we're going to be working with one of my favorite vegetables, cabbage. Now, there are two types of cabbage that we're going to be looking at. Green cabbage, which we're not using today, and red cabbage, which we are. Now, one of the really cool things about red cabbage is that red cabbage has a chemical called anthocyanin. Anthocyanin is what makes it look purple. But as we're going to see, anthocyanin can change color depending on what we call the pH, how acidic or basic the chemical is. And what we're going to do today is make our own pH indicator. To do that, we're going to do a few things. First, we're going to peel off the outer layers. Take 1, 2, and 3. You don't really need the third, but we'll just take it anyways. Now, these layers are kind of dirty, so we don't really want to eat them, but at the same time, we're not going to need to wash them because we're not going to eat them. What we're going to do instead is rip these up, and you can use a knife if you'd like also, and chop them into thin slices. Now remember to be careful. You're going to want the cutting board for this. Try to get them just into little strips. And we're going to take these, and you're going to put them in a half a cup of water. Okay, it doesn't need to be exact. It looks like we're more than enough. Two leaves will probably do the job. And what we're going to then do is take this to the microwave. So let's go to the microwave and heat this up for about 2 minutes.
On.
Okay, we actually microwaved it for 3 minutes, just because it wasn't picking up enough color, so I would try doing it for 3 minutes if you don't see that it's turning a dark purple. Now, get another glass or a jar or a bowl handy, and what we're going to do is pour out the juice, right? And you can see it's a nice purple color. And this is the chemical that we extracted from the cabbage. Now, be careful, it is hot because we're just boiling it. And now what you're going to do is the following. You're going to take a coffee filter or some other paper towel or something like that and cut it into strips. It doesn't really matter how big they are. And what you're going to do is dunk them in and let them dry out. You find a surface to put them on. And you can keep making as many strips as you have from cutting up that coffee filter. It doesn't really matter how many you have. I would make at least 5, and you should be able to make as many as you were able to cut up from one coffee filter, because we're going to be testing out about 5 different things for determining the pH. Now you're going to also keep this on the side because we're going to save the juice to actually make pH indicator that we can mix directly with certain chemicals. So we can take a mixture and pour some cabbage juice right in and see what the colors are. And so we're going to see what happens when we mix acidic things with cabbage juice and when we mix basic things with cabbage juice. Now, while this dries, and I would not recommend leaving this on the cutting board that we're about to use for everything else, so I'm just going to move these over here to the back. We're going to start our next project, which is also going to involve cabbage. Now for this, what we're going to have is some red cabbage here, and what we're going to do is peel off a bunch of leaves, okay, and we're going to really try to get as much of it as we could, and we're going to make sauerkraut. Now sauerkraut is a really interesting food because what sauerkraut is the leaves of a cabbage, and you can see there's always this whitish material on here. That's natural yeasts and bacteria, and they eat the sugars in there, specifically one called raffinose, which normally is not digestible by humans, but the sugars can be broken down by these bacteria. And they produce as a product something called lactic acid. Now, you guys can figure out, based on the fact that it's called lactic acid, what it's going to do to the pH. Now, because it's being made with a red cabbage, so what we can do is predict what color the cabbage is going to change based on our pH test with our pH indicator. So what we're going to do is make this sauerkraut, and you're going to photograph it every day and keep track of the color change. So what we're going to do is the following. We're just going to peel off a bunch of leaves. All right, we could take a look to make sure there's no bugs on them. And it's okay if you rip them, just because we're going to be shredding them anyways. I'm just going to work with these for the moment, but you can continue on and make however much you want. We, by the way, can use a jar as small as this, or even as small as this jar, or if you want to make a lot of sauerkraut for yourself, you could even use a jar as large as this. So it's really up to you. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to use a cutting knife to shred the cabbage. Okay, so we're just going to kind of go along here and make nice thin strips. And if you're using pre-shredded cabbage, then you don't even have to do this. You're set to go. So that's real. That would be a time saver. Okay. And what we're going to do is transfer this to a bowl. So get yourself a nice mixing bowl. And what we're going to do is just put this all in. Now, just as a point of reference, this cabbage weighs about 3 pounds, and this was kind of your average size cabbage. So figure that your average size cabbage, if you're going to use the whole thing, is going to be 3 pounds. The general ratio of salt to cabbage, which is what we're going to be using, is going to be 1 teaspoon for every pound. So in this case, I put in about 1 pound or so, maybe a little less, but I'm going to put more in anyways. So I'm going to put right now, for me, 1 teaspoon in for this amount. But of course, if you're working with more, just multiply it at a 1-to-1 ratio. So we're going to take a teaspoon measurer, which I have somewhere. Okay, so we found our teaspoon measurer here. And this is just 1, so I'm going to put in 1 teaspoon of salt. Just make sure it's open. Now, the type of salt doesn't really matter. It could be quote-unquote kosher salt, just plain table salt, sea salt, whatever type you want. It doesn't really make a difference. So what I'm going to do is sprinkle this in. And then what we're going to do is mush it around. Okay. Now, what you'll notice is very quickly, it'll start getting all wet and soggy. Now, I want you guys to think about why. Think back to what you learned last year, and we learned it a little bit this year as well. What happens when you put salt on the outside of a cell, right? Why is that going to draw the water out? What do we call that process? Okay, so you're going to keep doing that. Now, I'm going to make some more. We're just going to pause it over here just to save time, and we're going to see, once we do that, what the next step is. Okay, so we chopped up another half of the cabbage, and I'm going to add that into the bowl and add the appropriate amount of salt. Now, one of the things that would be done in really more of a formal sauerkraut making session would be, if you had the right tools, would be to pound the cabbage down, or massage it as they call it, to kind of break open the cell walls and let the salt in. I've made it in the past and not really found that completely necessary, so we're not going to do that. But if that's something that you have available, then by all means, make sure to mush it up. Okay, so we're going to add another teaspoon of salt with that. Now it's very important to mix it up to get it evenly distributed. Okay, so once we're just kind of done mixing around, first of all you'll feel then, you can see even my own hands are starting to get wet, and that's just from the water being drawn out from the cabbage. And what we're now going to do is pack it into a jar. Now this is way more than I need over here, but I'm just going to show you on a smaller jar what it would look like. So we're just going to put it in. And we're going to shove it in nice and tight. Now our goal is to get only the bacteria that can survive without air, or anaerobic bacteria that also live on the leaves of this cabbage, to grow. So that means that we're going to have to reduce the amount of air that could get in. And the way that we're going to do that is to first pack it in as tightly as possible. So you don't want the leaves to be very loose. There will be spaces, and they're going to get filled in with the cabbage juice that gets pulled out by the salt. Now, if you can, try to fill it up all the way to the top. If you don't have enough cabbage, or you find that your jar is a little too big, then what you can do is take a small Ziploc bag and fill it up with a little bit of water and put that on top of the cabbage, and that will act as a weight. So you can do that as well. For this, just because it's filled up, so I'm not going to need to. So I'm just going to pack this in a little bit more. Like I said, your goal is to squeeze it in as tight as possible. And then, when you're pretty much filled to the top, you just put the cap on. Now, what I want you guys to do is take a photo of this every day for the next 7 days and put it in your lab report. For it to be fully done, you can taste it along the way, but it's going to take about 2 weeks to be fully ready to be used for things like hot dogs or whatever else you put sauerkraut on. But it should start turning, well, you'll see what color, very shortly. So we're now just going to put this on the side and let this wait. So I hope you enjoy the pH lab using cabbage, and hope to see some interesting results.